خطأ موجود بالعالم العربي بموضوع علاقات إسرائيل وأمريكا، وبنرجع بنعيد وبنرجع بنكرر، وهي اسمح لي أقول لك أكذوبة اللوبي الصهيوني، إنه اليهود هن حاكمين أمريكا وهن بياخذوا القرار وهن عاملين وهن مساويين ومشاكل. لا.
The controlled opposition is claiming that do not rule America, that they are not the real decision makers, and that everything we're seeing regarding the Zionist lobby is all just a lie. Let's investigate this. Last week, a bipartisan bill was introduced in the House of Representatives that would enhance protections for Israel's qualitative military edge by including an effective Israeli veto on US arms sales to the Middle East. If you don't know what that means, basically, Israel would be able to cancel any weapon sale that the US makes to a Middle Eastern country. These corrupt lawmakers in the United States are trying to give a foreign country the right to cancel arms deals made by the United States. Think about that. They want this tiny country, Israel, to be able to tell the US who it can or can't sell weapons to. This is a clear case of the tail wagging the dog. If you bring up the fact that Israel controls most American politicians, some people will smear you as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist. Here's a story from 2018 which is very relevant to what's happening today. US President Donald Trump has reportedly signed a secret letter pledging not to strong-arm the Jewish state into relinquishing its nuclear weapons. The US president's backing came after Israel's ambassador to the United States reportedly pressured the administration last year, raising the ire of American officials. The rare moment of tension between the Israeli government and Trump White House in February 2017 came a month after Trump entered office and was set to devolve into yelling and profanity, according to a report by The New Yorker. "This is our fucking house," an unnamed US official was quoted saying in response to Israeli Ambassador Ron Dermer's demands. Apparently, one goy didn't get the memo. It's actually Israel's house now. Trump just gave Bibi a key to the White House, literally.
Show this?
Sure, I would love that. This was a special token of affection given by myself and the First Lady to Prime Minister and the First Lady of Israel. And it's a key, we call it a key to the White House, and it's a key to our country and to our hearts. And you've been an amazing leader for a long period of time, and this is in many respects the big day, because this is something that's very special. And
Thank you, Mr. President. And I have said, and this is true, that you have the key to the hearts of the people of Israel because of all the great things you've done for the Jewish state and the Jewish people. So thank you.
thank you very much. Fantastic.
Trump gave Bibi the key to the White House, even though Israel got caught planting spying devices near the White House in 2019. When you bribe politicians, you can get away with almost anything you want. Now back to the Israel veto bill. When the Pentagon notifies House and Senate committees on foreign affairs of plans to make a major arms sale, Congress has 30 days to say no, or it can go ahead. Existing law already guarantees Israel a qualitative military edge in the Middle East, but Congress, not Israel, is the arbiter of whether an arms sale meets QME standards. So Israel does not want US politicians to vote on arms sales. Israel wants to be the one that decides who the US can sell weapons to. Paid-off politicians always say, "We must support Israel because it's a democracy in the Middle East." Meanwhile, Israel doesn't even support a democratic process in the US. They want their colony to do as it's told.
Congressmen don't do anything unless you pressure them. And the only way to do that is with money.
In case you're not aware, lobbying is legal bribing. Most politicians are not serving the interests of their country. They're serving the interests of whoever is financing them. Here's a great example. 398 members of the House voted to violate the First Amendment and penalize Americans who participate in boycotts of Israel. Meanwhile, only 17 members of the House remained loyal to the Constitution. It's gotten to the point where a majority of US lawmakers are literally more loyal to Israel than they are to their own country.
So I started as a finance director. I worked for candidates in the 90s as their finance director, and I would come on a congressional race. I'm a 20-something kid who also knows nothing beyond the state borders, let alone overseas. And you thought about where you're going to go to raise the money that you needed to raise to win a race. And you went to labor, and you went to the choice community, and you went to the Jewish community. But before you went to the Jewish community, you had a conversation with the lead AIPAC person in your state, and they made it clear that you needed a paper on Israel. And so you called all of your friends who already had a paper on Israel that was designed by AIPAC, and we made that your paper. This was before there was a campaign manager or a policy director or field director, because you got to raise money before you do all that. I have written more Israel papers than you can imagine. I'm from Montana. I barely knew where Israel was until I looked at a map. And the poor campaign manager would come in, or the policy director, and I'd be like, here's your paper on Israel. This is our policy. We've sent it all over the country because this is how we've raised money.
As you just heard, most of the politicians you see defending Israel don't actually know anything about Israel. They're essentially puppets who are saying exactly what their financiers want them to say. Politicians need money for their campaigns, and the people offering the money are not giving it away for free. They want something in return.
Well, I'm not sure you should assume I'm not corrupt, but thank you for that, though. The system does produce corruption, and I think implicit in the system is corruption, when in fact, whether or not you can run for public office, and it costs a great deal of money to run for the United States Senate, even from a small state like Delaware, you have to go to those people who have money, and they always want something.
Well, I wonder whether you would feel that there's some virtue in forcing candidates to go out and try to raise money. I've heard people, probably people who didn't run for office, say that it's uplifting to go out and try to get money. Do you think that there's something unuplifting about putting a limit to how much you can ask one man to give you?
I think it's the most degrading experience in the world to have to go out and ask for money, because you know that unless you accidentally agree with the position taken by the person or group that has the money, that you run the risk of deciding whether or not you're going to prostitute yourself to give the answer you know they want to hear in order to get funded to run for that office.
I want them to understand for themselves that the relationship between the United States and Israel is more than the relationship of two governments. It's a bond between people, forged a link by successive generations and grounded in an abiding commitment to Israel's security, a bond that can never be broken. It's something that Bibi knows I take personally, and I assure you, so does the President. So as I said,
Whitney Webb wrote on Twitter, quote, "Your friendly election season reminder that the real government in the US is the CIA." Who does she think she's fooling? The US government is almost completely beholden to Israel. If the CIA was a competent intelligence agency, they wouldn't have allowed their country to be infiltrated. If you've watched my other videos, you already know that Whitney works for Russia. And other Russian government propagandists promote the same disinformation that she does, in the same time frame as well. Lee Stranahan hosts a radio show for Sputnik, which is a Russian government outlet, and he doesn't even try to hide it. He told The Atlantic, quote, "I'm on the Russian payroll now. When you work at Sputnik, you're being paid by the Russians." What you're seeing here is disinformation, but these Russian assets aren't doing it to protect Israel. They're actually doing it to keep Americans stupid. Russia also wants the downfall of the US to continue, So it's in their best interest to distract you from real issues and portray America and the West as the root of all evil.
This is exactly what the KGB and Marxist-Leninist propaganda wants from Americans, to distract their opinion, attention, and mental energy from real issues of the United States into a non-issues, into a non-world, non-existent harmony. Obviously, it's more beneficial for the Soviet aggressors to have a bunch of duped Americans than Americans who are self-conscious, healthy, physically fit, and alert to the reality. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi obviously is not on the payroll of the KGB. But whether he knows it or not, he contributes greatly to demoralization of American society. And he's not the only one.
There is tremendous pressure inside the political process to make sure that the voters stay aligned inside either the Democrat or Republican parties. Why? Because both of those parties have been captured by special interests. And those special interests are, quite frankly, the antithesis of the interests of the people. And so therefore, for example, if people in the United States care about education, but unfortunately there's a banker that gets in between the student and the student's ability to go to school, if they care about health care, there's the insurance industry that gets in between the patient and the doctor who is seeking to provide care. And so we have all of these special interests that have positioned themselves in between the political decision makers and the people themselves. The process now is more responsive to those special interests than it is to the values and the wishes of the American people. When I first went to Congress, I did not go to Congress to pay particular attention to any area outside of the black community that I represented that was in need, and of course U.S. Africa policy, which was abhorrent and unfortunately still is. But what I ran into, I bumped into at almost every turn were these special interests. And there's no more special interest that has any more influence than the pro-Israel lobby. And so then when I did outreach, for example, to the Muslim community in the United States, I bumped into the pro-Israel lobby, which of course does not want to have to contend with a politicized Muslim community, which is as large as and is as wealthy as the pro-Israel lobby is in the United States. So yes, I first-handedly and also frontally was assaulted by the presence of the pro-Israel lobby to such an extent.
Physically assaulted?
Well, politically assaulted.
Okay.
To such an extent that my father had to ask the question publicly, what does Stone Mountain, Georgia have to do with Israel? What I was doing was servicing the needs of my constituents. And I was not allowed to do that because I did not toe the line on U.S. policy for Israel.
What line is that they wanted? Were you told directly that you had to toe a line, or explain that to me?
Well, every candidate for Congress at that time had a pledge. They were given a pledge to sign. And I was new on the scene. And so the pledge had Jerusalem as the capital city, the military superiority of Israel.
American Congress people have to sign this pledge.
Yes, you sign the pledge. If you don't sign the pledge, you don't get money. So, for example, it was almost like water torture for me. My parents observed this. I would get a call, and the person on the other end of the phone would say, I want to do a fundraiser for you. And then we would get into the planning. I would get really excited because, of course, you have to have money in order to run a campaign. And then 2 weeks, 3 weeks into the planning, they would say, did you sign the pledge? And then I would say, no, I didn't sign the pledge. And then my fundraiser would go kaput. I made it public. This probably nobody had said anything about it. But I made it public, and then, you know, the excuse was, well, you know, those were just overzealous advocates for Israel. So then the tactic changed. And, but this is what is done for 535 members of the United States Congress. 100 senators, 435 members of the House of Representatives have to now write a paragraph, which basically says the same thing. So it's not a pledge, but it's a paragraph, and you post it, and, you know, there are these forums you have to go to at the synagogues or whatever. And then, you know, if you don't perform appropriately, then you don't get money to run your campaign. The problem is that it requires an awful lot of money to run a campaign. And whether it's a woman's organization, an environmental organization, people can read about this on the internet if they're interested. If you go to thomas.loc.gov, that is the official United States Congress website. And if you put in the name Gus Savage, because Gus Savage was a black member of Congress who was targeted by the pro-Israel lobby. And he had the foresight to use his position as an incumbent in the House of Representatives to put his experience on the congressional record. For the entire existence of the United States Congress now, people will be able to access his experience. And what he wrote was that it was the Garden Club of New Jersey that gave his opponent $5,000. But it wasn't really the Garden Club of New Jersey. It was the activists who were associated with AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Well, the district that I initially represented in Congress, I represented so many districts because redistricting was a tool that was used to target me, to eliminate me from the Congress. But the district that initially sent me there was a district that was comprised of rural blacks in the black belt of Georgia. These are people who have not had access to equal opportunity at all. The district was challenged in the Supreme Court. And with the assistance of the Anti-Defamation League, the district was dismantled. It generally takes about $250,000 minimum to take a case from filing up to the Supreme Court. And the people who filed the lawsuit to dismantle, they challenged my ability to represent the people of that particular district.
Who were these people?
Well, actually, interestingly, there were 5 white citizens, one of whom had been the white male candidate that I defeated in the Democratic primary. And they were aided and abetted by the Anti-Defamation League. And when the case arrived at the Supreme Court, interestingly, on the same day as an environmental case, the spotted owl case, the Supreme Court decided that the habitat for the spotted owl should be protected, but that the black voters in that district could have no protection. And so the district was dismantled. Well, I have, because of the notoriety about me telling my story, and then, of course, the public positions that I've taken supporting the human rights aspirations, the legitimate rights and the aspirations of the Palestinian people, I have a target on my forehead. And that then means that every means that is available to the pro-Israel lobby will be utilized to make sure that I do not ever occupy a position of authority.